Spirit of Thersites here. While I have made a January 6th Riot video in the past with my friend Sean, I decided to revisit the topic a week and a half later because I felt that there was more to say and that it would be nice to have all of my thoughts in a more succinct format. It also helps me to put more content on this channel. Today, January 20th, Donald Trump will finally leave office and be replaced by Joe Biden, the president-elect. This is a big deal, as it always is, but it would not have been a very big deal if not for the events of January 6th. I am convinced, despite the use of the word insurrection by most media outlets, that the appropriate word for what happened on January 6th is, in fact, riot. An insurrection implies some kind of a cause, a legitimate cause. This group of people had no real cause. They were lied to by a fat old man about the outcome of an election, and they were also lied to by Trump's various cronies about how they could get Mike Pence to change the result at this late date, which he had no power to do whatsoever. They were lied to. And make no mistake about it, while the people who did storm the Capitol, especially the people who participated in the beating of the police officers and the destruction inside of the building, etc., while those people are very much criminals, they also are victims of Donald Trump and his lies. So we should have some sympathy for them in the sense that these people were lied to and their lives will be badly damaged because of the legal consequences resulting from their actions, which were incited by a sad old man whose political career is now very much in the toilet. Another thing that I think really works for the word riot in this context is that if there's one thing that right-wingers absolutely despise, it's a good protest. They don't really believe in peaceful protesting. They claim to be constitutionalists, but they're not big fans of the First Amendment. At least not when it gives their opponent something that they enjoy doing. So the fact is, this was supposedly organized as a protest against the election results, and then it resulted in a riot. Right-wingers like to say that all these left-wing protests always end up being riots. So turn their own shit against them. The term coup usually refers to movements of small groups of elites or police and military units seizing power. And that's not really what happened here. The group of people who seized it were a true motley crew, including a Beowulf cosplayer, and their overrun of the Capitol was extraordinarily disorganized. Sure, there were people who planned to do this. People who organized, people who came prepared, that got out the handcuffs, for instance. But most of the people there were incited on the spot by a handful of people who were neither powerful nor important, and whose plan was idiotic in the extreme. This is, I think, a riot rather than a coup or insurrection. Giving it the label coup or insurrection takes the people like the guy with the handcuffs and makes him into an actual political actor. It helps to legitimize what he did and elevate him to a level that he does not belong on. So, the January 6th riot resulted in the Capitol being occupied for a few hours. They did some damage to the building, but ultimately this was a futile, feckless, broke-dick display of impotence. This was depressing and hypocritical. As I said, right-wingers were bitching and moaning all summer about how horrible it was that black people were, quote, rioting and looting. So, of course, you know, they then do the same thing, but rather than doing it to random cities around the country, they instead do it to one of the most iconic structures in America. Because why the hell not, I guess. This is a fitting bookend to the Trump era. He came in as someone who was excellent at tapping into and exploiting discontent. He then maintained fervent support among his base throughout the entirety of his run and his presidency by perpetually making sure that people knew that he was fighting their shared enemies. He basically played the champion of the people. And he was the only guy who was going to stand up against the people that they hated, the people who were causing their lives to suck. But Ultimately, this strategy resulted in him inciting a riot. And there's a further piece of irony. The main reason for Trump deciding to pursue the Stop the Steal campaign for over 2 months was not that he thought he had an actual chance of changing the results. After all, the lawyer he hired to represent him was Rudy Giuliani, who has not practiced law in about 30 years. If he were serious about mounting a real legal challenge, he would have had more lawyers, and more importantly, lawyers who have actually practiced law on a constitutional level recently, rather than someone who did criminal law 30 fucking years ago. The whole thing was a scam, and the point of the scam was to show his strength. Because if he muddles the results enough in the minds of his supporters especially, but also maybe some influenceable independents and people who think that he wouldn't do this unless he had a cause, he turns himself from being a loser to someone who is clearly still viable, who has more to give, who can come back in 2024 and do it again. That was the point of Stop the Steal. He was willing to rile up the population and undermine people's belief in democracy to stroke his own ego and advance his own political career. That's what we're dealing with Donald Trump. I think that's actually more of an indictment than if he had had an actual coup. There are people who do coups who actually believe that they're doing something positive. Trump does not believe he's doing anything positive. He's merely servicing his own ego, and that's it. He also did basically nothing to help out in the stimulus debate until the last minute. He was spending most of his time running the Stop the Steal nonsense, playing golf, eating cheeseburgers, and tending to his broken fifis. That's all he did. The man was useless. He's been a bad lame duck. I mean, there are lame ducks who are, you get out of the way. There are lame ducks who sometimes do a few low-key decent things, and then there are lame ducks who incite fucking riots. Trump is the worst lame duck ever. I think he takes that title pretty easily at this point, after the last few months. The revolution might not be televised, but the sad end of a failed political experiment certainly was. Trumpism and the possibility, or at least the certainty, that the Republican Party was going to go right-wing populist kind of died on January 6th, or at least the possibility was greatly diminished. I don't think it's quite dead yet. People who are saying it's completely dead, I think, are being a bit premature. So, now some immediate questions pop up. Will Trump go to prison? There are people who say yes. I doubt it. Due to Ford pardoning Nixon, it has very much become the norm for presidents to avoid serious penalties for their actions. George W. Bush did a lot of horrible stuff while he was in office. And it's hard to argue that he was ignorant of any of it or that he did so without malintent. He helped all of his contractor friends get rich, and that was partly the point of his presidency. Yet he has never faced a day in court, nor will he ever. In America, we do not put rich people in prison. We don't even put them on trial 90% of the time. Because Trump is so hated by pretty much all the members of the elite, however, I do think that he will take a lot of lawsuits. He's been a shady businessman for decades. He's got a lot of enemies, especially in New York. He is also notorious for not paying people after contracting them to do work for him. So he will probably take some financial hits. His company will have trouble finding new partners. So his business will take some hits. I don't even think the whole company will go under or anything like that. But certainly it will not be a good decade for the Trump company. And it will not turn around for them until Donald is dead. He has really caused a lot of ill will and damaged the name of his family. So it will be a rough decade for him, but fortunately he eats a lot of Big Macs, so he won't be around for the entire decade, would be my guess. What of his cronies, however? Will Sidney Powell the Kraken, will she go to prison? How about Rudy? I think some of his cronies will end up being blackballed or taken to court for various offenses. I'm not sure exactly which ones. There are probably going to be more of them taken to court than actually get prosecuted. But anyone who thinks that Joe Biden and his AG nominee Merrick Garland are going to be firm prosecutors who are really looking to go after all of the criminals and criminality of the Trump administration are kidding themselves. It's possible that Biden or some ambitious AG in a place like New York might want to go after some of the worst criminals of the Trump administration just to build their political reputations. But for the most part, I think that a combination of the fear of the Trump base, who have proven themselves to be completely insane, and just in general, people wanting to move on from this period, will mean that there will be far, far fewer recriminations than, frankly, there should be. Trump probably does belong in an orange jumpsuit, but so far as I can tell, the only thing orange about him will remain his skin. So, there you go. Another thing that's interesting, or at least here's my prediction. A lot of people have been speculating that with Trump losing and then the riot happening, that he is now completely out of contention for 2024, that he has no chance, and that he will retire from politics. I disagree with that. We have to remember something about Trump. This is a man who does not experience shame the same way that normal people experience shame. In 2012, he went, or was it 2011 or 2012, he went to a press correspondence dinner. And at that dinner, Obama mocked him to his face over Trump pushing birtherism. And he talked about how silly Trump is and what kind of meaningless decisions he makes on his show. Later that evening, Obama, cool as a cucumber, came out and announced that American forces had captured and killed Osama bin Laden. That alone should have killed Trump's career. Any normal person would realize just how bad they got pwned. I'm using the term pwned because that was still a current usage at the time this happened. Trump, however, as I said, does not experience shame like a normal person. He then went on to run in 2015. And he somehow won the nomination. He said all kinds of things along the way which people thought would be disqualifying. It turned out that a lot of the supporters that he had at Trump Tower when he announced were paid actors. None of those things hurt him. He kept gaining momentum because he has one thing going for him. The man is positively brilliant when it comes to finding the flaws of fellow Republicans. That is his calling card. The one thing that he's really good at, his true calling in life. It's probably his only calling in life because he's a very bad businessman and he was not a very effective administrator of the American state either. Because he still sees himself as the man, and because he still sees himself as being in his prime, Trump will try to run again in 2024. Whether or not he wins the nomination is an open question. The party seems to be split in two, and he has lost the support of a lot of people who were more casual supporters. The establishment wing of the Republican Party seems to be back, and they will not go down without a fight like they did in 2016, where they failed to rally behind the resistance candidate to defeat Trump. This time, they will not do the same thing. Trump has a chance, a punching chance to win the nomination in 2024, but he is not the favorite, at least not as things stand right now. And because he will have a chance, and because he surrounds himself with cronies who tell him that he's the best, that he's a shoo-in, that everybody's with him, I think he will run again. This means that all the people talking about will Don Jr., Eric, or Ivanka run in 2024 are mistaken. Donald will not allow them. They know if they try to run, they will be disinherited, and all of them lack the requisite talent to actually make money for themselves. Therefore, none of them will have the balls to challenge their father. So he will run again and probably lose. If he gets nominated, even against a weak candidate like Kamala Harris, who I assume will be the 2024 nominee, Trump still has an uphill battle. The man did a lot of damage to himself, and all the people who were fear-mongering and seemed like they had their hair on fire about Trump planning coups, they can now point to this event on January 6th, and it's very hard to tell them that they're definitively wrong. So, yeah, this is very bad for Trump. He is basically finished. but he doesn't know it. And again, as I said, because he doesn't know he's finished, sometimes he defies the odds and somehow makes it back. Will he prove to be a high-fiber turd once again and float to the top? I don't know. But don't be surprised if he does. Side question, will Rudy Giuliani get paid? Rudy signed up to work for Trump as his lawyer for $20,000 a day. And apparently he was working so hard that he didn't have time to make sure that his hair dye was good to go before he started his press conference near the dildo shop. So, to me, this shows a lot of things. The $20,000 a day shows that Rudy does not believe that Donald Trump actually won the election. If I were friends with someone and I thought that they had been robbed of a presidential election and that the people, millions and millions of people who voted for that person were robbed, and that the American democratic system was being subverted by nefarious forces, and I were a lawyer able to help, I would probably not charge very much for my legal services. Charging $20,000 a day tells me that Rudy Giuliani was in it strictly for the money, and he knew that this was hopeless and bullshit. So, he was putting on a show to take care of his family for after he's gone. He just wanted to build a nice nest egg. Rudy was not serious about trying to defend Trump. He tried, I guess he did all the legal procedures he could do, but the man had no case because there was no election fraud. And the Republicans up to this point have produced absolutely zero evidence. Trump, one of his classic moves, I alluded to it earlier, is to hire contractors and then refuse to pay them after the work is done. Usually on the grounds that he's unsatisfied with their work. And there have been times where he's actually gotten away with doing this or settled out of court for less than they agreed to. I think that this will be a case where he has to settle because he has a written agreement with Rudy that he's paying him the shitload of money, but that Rudy will not get the full amount that he earned. Rudy made an absolute fool of himself and really undermined anyone's ability to believe that he was once a successful prosecutor. Even the people who saw it no longer believe it. So he shamed himself immensely, and I think he deserves every penny. If there is a hashtag pay Rudy his money, I am for it. Even though I don't give a shit about Rudy Giuliani in general, but that man earned his living by making an absolute mockery of himself and his name. What of the rioters? Will they be punished, and if so, how severely? I suspect that they will be prosecuted, but that they will not have the full force of the law leveled upon them. In general, when you commit crimes in the context of a protest or riot, a political riot that is not, I guess, a sports riot or whatever, the penalties tend to be quite a bit lower than if it is committed without the context of a movement. In general, it seems that prosecutors and police are somewhat hesitant to try to make martyrs out of people. I think that the chief organizers and the people who had really nefarious plans, such as the gentleman with the handcuffs, will be punished fairly severely, at least in relative terms. Whereas people like that guy who just posed in Pelosi's office, or the guy who took a dump in Chuck Schumer's office, will be punished, but probably not very severely. At least that is how I feel things will go. I do not believe that Biden and his new AG, Merrick Garland, will be prosecuting people very vigorously, whether those people are former Trump administration officials, Trump rioters, or Wall Street and white-collar criminals. In fact, I've noticed that Obama and now Biden specifically are picking attorney generals who are friendly with Wall Street and have no interest in pursuing white-collar crime. But that's a bit of a tangent. Let's stay on topic. So, I'd like to pivot to talking about the deeper issues at play beyond the riot. How did we get to this point? Obviously, just having a few assholes on a forum talking about their plan to try to kidnap Pelosi, AOC, or name a congressperson does not lead to this kind of a mass-scale riot. There has to be some stoking. A lot of that stoking was provided by Trump, who lied about the election. But going beyond that, why is there so much discontent that Trump can tap into and that the rioters can tap into? This comes from a couple of sources. One I've never talked about before, one which I have. I'll start out with the new one first. The more I think about it, the more I realize that not only has the GOP reached sort of an impasse, but it has been a zombie party in many ways since 2008. By 2008, the Republican Party had failed immensely. Its governing ideology, which was Reaganism, the right-wing version of neoliberalism, had been proven to be a failure, yet they never recognized or acknowledged that. They talked about soul-searching and rebuilding, but then in 2010, the backlash against Obama enabled them to come back to power and be viable again with John Boehner and Mitch McConnell. And after that, the Republicans said, fuck off the soul-searching, and they just muddled forward without an identity. And in a two-party duopoly like the shit show that we have, you can do that and still have success. So that's what they did. But this is still a party which fundamentally has no core beliefs. They have no real core values. It's unclear what their goals are. They have some policies they stand for at times, but there is not really a clear Republican project. The Tea Party and then the establishment Bush holdovers were not really all that compatible, but they just kind of muddled along as people who say no to Obama at every turn for the sake of saying no. They largely redefined themselves as an opposition party dedicated to one man, Barack Obama. Then along came Trump, and it just became kind of a cult of personality. And Republicans have that tendency in general. Even with George W. Bush, a lot of people don't remember this, but a lot of his supporters were mindless drones who hung on his every word. Not to say that there aren't Democrats who did the same for Obama, Clinton, etc., but it is worse with Republicans. With Trump, he was the cause. This was the guy who was going to go to Washington and clear out the criminals. Speaking of which, we'll get to that in a minute, but the GOP, we can see that both their base and the politicians really don't have a clear goal. If we look more carefully at the course of the 2012 and 2016 primaries. 2012 was the ultimate example. Before voting started in Iowa, there were at least 7 or 8 different frontrunners who came and went. Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, all kinds of people who are fairly marginal and bizarre rose to the forefront at some point during that race. And during the debates, they largely agreed on policy, but they had very different styles. They also, if you really looked into what they believed beyond the debates, they all have different emphases. And a lot of them had different approaches to institutional issues, such as how do we deal with Social Security? How do we address climate change? So they really put off the hard work, and people bounced aimlessly from candidate to candidate before Romney just rode a centrist establishment wave to a narrow victory. In 2016, Trump rode sort of in the moderate lane, just like Romney had in a way, although of course he never identified himself as a moderate conservative or whatever. He just ran as an anti-establishment guy. And the other Republicans were trying to be somewhat like Trump, sort of the outsidery bad guy, or bad boy, not bad guy. And then some other people tried to run as more establishment favorites. A lot of them had no reason to be there. Lindsey Graham ran, for fuck's sake. He ran as basically just a pure war hawk, as if there are a lot of people who just really want somebody who loves to bomb other countries in the race. Trump basically won because he was the only person there, as derisible and absurd as he is, who seemed to have any vision whatsoever. What did Jeb Bush stand for? What did Marco Rubio stand for? Fuck only knows. It's not even all that clear what Trump stands for, but he is a little clearer than those guys. He said no to certain things, such as continued involvement in overseas wars. That was popular. He also talked about outsourcing, something that most Republicans won't touch because they rely on heavy donations from corporations which do manufacturing or energy production. So Trump rocked the boat, and that's why he won. It was not that he said anything brilliant or even remotely intelligent. It's just that he actually had a voice and a brand in a place which was an absolute vacuum of ideas. more of a vacuum than Dave Rubin's head. We also have to remember the second point of why there was so much discontent and why people are so unstable right now. There is a backdrop of legitimate repeated failure by the political class and also an equal, if not greater amount of failure by the business class. America's elite are fundamentally incompetent. They no longer really have any claim to meaningful expertise. Whatever technocratic management of the government that there is not all that impressive. These people no longer inspire respect because they don't do their jobs very well. And while there are still experts out there who could potentially make things a hell of a lot better, they are being dragged down with the muck. This obsession among the elite with consensus and maintaining a consensus foreign policy and consensus economics along a neoliberal line is preventing the spread of actual ideas into governmental practice. I believe we will see this continue with Joe Biden, unfortunately. There's also a lot of economic stagnation from neoliberalism. Since 1980, if not before, there has been very, very limited wage growth. Only from 2015 until the outbreak of COVID was there growth in real wages for the first time in 40 years, almost. That's a damning stat, and it really goes a long way toward explaining why people feel hopeless and desperate, why they feel like they're getting robbed. They have a general feeling that things are getting worse. Prices are increasing. The healthcare system is increasingly broken and unaffordable. The housing market is overheated, even after the big housing bubble which caused the Great Recession. Tech giants are growing bigger and bigger and intruding into our privacy. No one's breaking them up. No one is regulating them. A lot of people can't really articulate these things well, but a lot of people do feel the pressure of these things. There is elite failure. People are aware of it. And neither the Democrats, who just want to keep going the direction that we're going largely with a handful of tweaks, nor the Republicans, who either like things the way that they are or else want to react to them in a brainless way the way Trump does, are offering any real solutions. The progressive wing, which wants to address a lot of the economic suffering, is being squelched by a flood of corporate money into the Democratic coffers. The Democratic Party is now every bit as corporate as the Republican Party. There is no Labor Party in America. There is no party which really represents unions or the working class. A lot of the working class are turning to Trump because he also eats his steak with ketchup, or because he hates political correctness and they do too. They're being forced to vote for things that are meaningless and childish because there are no actual issues on the fucking ballot. As many people have observed, there is no way to vote against Goldman Sachs. No matter which party's in power, various people from that organization of criminals will be in the United States government making policy. That being said, the question is really where the Republicans go from here. I don't think that they will collapse. I'll get into the reasons why. They actually still have great opportunities before them because with the Trump riots, corporations are freaked the fuck out about the Republican Party, and they're now putting all their money into Democrats. This means the Democratic Party will now be giving a full-service blowjob to corporations 24/7. This will be a suck-and-swallow operation from this point forward, barring some reversal of this in some way. This means that there is an opening on the issue of class. There are a lot of people who are looking for class politics. Trump tapped into that a touch, although he didn't go very far with it, but that's where the potential is. The first party to figure out that a lot of people want to vote for their economic interest, that people want to have more affordable health care, if not an actual single-payer fucking system. People want to have higher wages, they want to have better job opportunities. The first party to figure that out and talk about that will be advantaged. Rather than trying to steal elections through bullshit rules, the Electoral College, and figuring out ways to make it harder to vote, the Republicans could actually do something crazy, like campaign on issues people care about, and try to get votes that way. I know it's insane, but they could do that. It is an option. But the resurgent wing right now in the Republican Party is that establishment wing. What the fuck? Okay, my computer just looked like it was about to freeze and it wasn't clear that it was recording. I don't know if I'll edit that out or not. We'll see. Anyhow, back to the program. The Trump wing does have some class rhetoric, not really backed up by policy, but the establishment wing is resurgent at the moment, and it is absolutely allergic to class. It is horrified by the idea of the unwashed masses gathering together, and it wants to return to the glory days of George W. Bush, and that's not going to go very far. That being said, I don't think we'll see the death of the GOP right now. Some people think we will. I can see the reasons why. But I just don't think that will happen because Americans seem to be attached to this idiotic two-party system. A system which itself needs to be replaced and is a flaming failure. If 2010 proved anything, it's that a party which has no identity, no ideas, and no values can be rewarded with power. That does happen. And that's what the Republicans are banking on. I will go so far as to say that if the Republicans, as they are right now, manage to do the traditional midterm win in 2022 and are resuscitated by that, that is the worst thing that can happen to them. Because then they're guaranteed almost a 2024 defeat and further degradation over the course of the decade. Not to mention the consequences to the country of having a political party, one of only two that we get, which has contributed not a single goddamn thing in my entire lifetime, at least nothing of value. I can honestly say that. The Republican Party, within my lifetime, has contributed absolutely nothing positive. It has been a force of destruction. And at times, at its best, it's a force of indifference. The Democrats, of course, are not much better, especially since Bill Clinton took control in 1992. The Democrats occasionally do a few good things around the margins. For instance, you're less likely to get spam calls when a Democrat appoints somebody to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And loan sharks are a little bit more regulated. But for the most part, these two parties are the same, and they're both terrible now. So let's say, theoretically, the Republicans get their asses kicked in 2022, they don't retake anything. Then they actually engage in introspection and revitalization. What if they then abandon both the false populism of Donald Trump and the neoconservatism of George W. Dipshit and go back to being the GOP of, say, Lincoln or, better yet, Theodore Roosevelt? A party which actually stands for something positive, which actually tries to improve people's lives in some way. And then they can do something truly radical, more radical than storming the Capitol building. Actually contributing something to the fucking political environment of America. Not being a complete drain on the fucking system. Not being Mitch McConnell, the vampire turtle motherfucker. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the Trump riot. It will have negative consequences for many people. And those people include all of us. Even those of us on the left. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Those are my predictions such as they are at this moment. I am glad to see Trump leave. I have always despised him. But I'm not exactly excited about Joe Biden because I also really hate centrist Democrats. I don't know if I will bother watching much of the inauguration or not. But we'll see. I'm also curious about Trump's pathetic-ass send-off. It sounds kind of amusing. Probably watch that too. Hell, I know I'll end up watching this shit. What am I talking about? Of course I will. I'm a political junkie. I won't like it, though. I won't like it one bit. Anyway, I'm Spirit of Thersites. Left is best. Peace the fuck out. Good night.